Proverbs has proved to be a very interesting book. And as we spoke during the week, preparing for today, not realising that Faye would not be here, we talked about how today we're kind of doing three parts. So first, is the wisdom that Proverbs gives us for, husband and wife, the wisdom that Proverb gives for parents to their children, and the wisdom that it gives to the children for their relationship to their parents. And I have to say, as you look at Proverbs, there is some pretty robust language used in Proverbs, to the point where there's probably some that goes beyond a PG rating, interestingly, when you start looking at this topic. So we will try and steer our way through the landmines on this. But it actually got me thinking about probably the first time I genuinely delved into Proverbs, not necessarily for virtuous purposes, but while at Avondale, in the pre-mobile phone era, when you would sit in class and pass notes, we kind of got into this thing where if you wanted to insult somebody, you just had to find the perfect proverb. And that way you didn't have to write the proverb out. You'd just write, Proverbs and the reference. And so you'd come across Proverbs like Proverbs 19 verse 2. It's not good to have zeal without knowledge, nor to be hasty and miss the way. But then I discovered the knockout proverb. And this was the proverb that was guaranteed to just put an end to whatever discussion was taking place. And it's Proverbs 18 verse 2. I'm going to have to read it for you now, aren't I? It says, a fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions. And at that point, there would be no note coming back. Not from Proverbs anyway. Maybe Lamentations, but... In Proverbs, the whole foundation of Proverbs is that it starts with God. Wisdom starts with God. In Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5 and 6, and we'll pretty much be sticking in Proverbs today, so if you've got it there, feel free to try and keep up. Proverbs 3, 5 and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways to submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Magnificent proverb, lifts us up, points us to God. You keep on reading, you get to Proverbs 9:10, and in chapter 9 and verse 10 it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. This is the foundation that we build not only Proverbs on, but it's what Proverbs gives us in terms of wisdom and says, this is what we should build our life on. And then as we get right down to the end of Proverbs, the theme continues. And interestingly enough, and we'll touch on this briefly, but Proverbs 31 seems to have been delivered wisdom from a woman. And at the end of Proverbs, second last verse, it says, charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And it's this sense that from beginning to end, Proverbs is counseling us, encouraging us, maybe even commanding us to build a life of wisdom that's built on the Lord. Now, it does say much about marriage, parenting, children, and if I could sum it up, there's probably two things that I would say when it comes to marriage. We'll get to some of the other elements in a minute. There's two pieces of wisdom that Proverbs has for us. And the first would be to say marriage is good. And then the second would be to say marriage is misery. And they're both there in Proverbs. So let's start with the good one. Marriage is good. Proverbs 18 verse 22. Proverbs 18:22. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favour from the Lord. Definitely fits in the marriage is good category. And look, as we talk about this is not saying that, if you've got a life of singleness or whatever it be, that's bad. What we're doing is looking and saying, what is it that Proverbs is upholding in terms of, man and woman, husband and wife? And what it's saying is, man, if you find a good wife, you found favour from the Lord. You found what is good. Proverbs 19 verse 14 goes along those same kind of theme. It says, house and wealth are inherited from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. And there's this sense that God is in a good marriage. God is seeking to bring that blessing. So now I'm going to pinch, if you like, a parable that Faye was going to use and that we talked about during the week. And in a sense, it's a little like Jesus would tell these biblical parables where he'd start out, the kingdom of God is like. In this case, it's marriage is like a hot air balloon. On the odd Sunday morning, I can remember, hearing this sound, this unidentifiable sound sometimes drifting over our house, particularly in winter. And you'll open the curtain and look out the window, and there up above the house will be a hot air balloon. So marriage is like a hot air balloon. Take a balloon fashioned from a great volume of fabric, a basket in which to stand, and a heat source. Put it together well, and you can soar into the sky and witness amazing vistas of beauty. However, if the fire is wrongly used, it can injure people permanently, burn the balloon to the ground, and start a fire that causes untold damage. This is the picture of marriage in Proverbs. Two people love each other and they bring a spark into their marriage, and that spark lights a fire that provides warmth. The marriage fire, as it were, heats the air and fills the balloon. The balloon fills and lifts into the air. It takes the basket and everyone in that basket along for the most amazing ride. Rightly used, that marriage fire will lift that balloon to amazing heights, provides spectacular views and an ability to see the big picture in a way that is unequaled. However, if a marriage partner takes their fire somewhere else, there will not be much fire to lift that balloon. The balloon will stay on the ground, or even worse, that fire will become dangerous and cause permanent damage. It may destroy the one who misuses the fire or others around them, and it may even burn the balloon to the ground. And I guess this is where we move from the marriage is good proposal of Proverbs to the marriage is misery. Because right through Proverbs there is, if you like, this sequence of danger signs, danger warnings. And if you think about it, if you're walking along and you see a sign that says, danger, cliff edge or something like that, or danger explosives, or, danger mine shafts, or whatever it be, you are on alert, you are careful. And this is what Proverbs is doing. It's the clanging bell, the warning siren, it's the red light flashing. And so you have passages that come through, some of which I'll leave you to read for yourself, just a little of which I'll read. But you see it coming through from Proverbs chapter 5 into chapter 6 in particular. And as Faye shared last week, there is this sense that we are warned of foolishness and naivety, I guess you'd say, being simple, and on the other hand, invited down a path of wisdom. And so in Proverbs chapter 5, verse 1, there's this invitation, my son, and it's for everyone, my son, pay attention to my wisdom, turn your ear to my words of insight. And then he provides a little bit of wisdom. And then by verse 7 again, he says, now then, my sons, listen to me, do not turn aside from what I say. It's this call to wisdom. And then you come to Proverbs chapter 6. And in Proverbs chapter 6, it begins with the title in my Bible, Warning Against Folly. And it's really just a continuation of what you find in Proverbs chapter 5. And I want to come all the way down to verse 23. And there in verse 23, it says, for this command is a lamp. This teaching is a light. And correction and instruction are the way of life, or the way to life, keeping you from your neighbour's wife, from the smooth talk of a wayward woman. Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. For a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life. Now that's probably about as far as we go on the PG rating. But you get the point. And what these verses are doing is putting up the big danger sign. The danger, stay away from adultery, keep sex for your marriage partner within marriage. And then it goes on and it gives us a little bit of a taste of the consequences. And it talks about things like, if you light a fire in your lap, expect that you're going to get burnt. And so it goes. By Proverbs 6 verse 30, it starts to compare it and says, look, people, let me quote it correctly. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his hunger when he's starving. Yet, if he's caught, he must pay, talking about justice in those days, sevenfold, though it costs him all the wealth of his house. But a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself. And it's this sense that we've moved from marriage is good to here's what it looks like to make marriage misery. And it's not that Proverbs is seeking to only speak to men, even though it often talks about, my son, listen to my wisdom. Proverbs, as you read through it, you soon recognise, if you like, that sin is an equal opportunity destroyer. So don't get hung up on my son, listen to this or that. It's for all of us. So having said that marriage is good, wisdom also tells us that marriage can be misery. Proverbs 21 verse 9, better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome woman. And we could turn that round either way, men or women. Proverbs 15:17, a bowl of vegetables with someone you love is better than steak with someone you hate. Vegetarian steak, of course. Proverbs 27:15, a quarrelsome wife is like the dripping of a leaky roof in a rainstorm. I like the picture it paints. But equally, we could say the same for a quarrelsome husband. And interestingly, the one about living on the corner of the roof, that gets repeated verbatim twice in Proverbs, both in chapter 21 and then again in chapter 25, verse 4. So the underlying sense that we get as we come to Proverbs is that, A, marriage is good, but marriage can be misery, so therefore be wise. Think before you get married. Be wise in who you marry, and it will make all the difference. The person you marry will influence you forever, and you will influence them. And by the time you get to Proverbs 31, and I'm treading very carefully when I get to Proverbs 31, what you see is a picture painted of what you don't and do want. It warns against drunkenness and against lacking self-control. These are the wise words from the mother of the king. And so by extension, the message is don't marry a drunk. Not only don't marry one, don't be one. Don't marry someone who lacks self-control, but instead find a partner with good character, who upholds right and justice, who is industrious, respected, of good reputation, someone with wisdom. Put those two people together in love in a marriage. Bring that spark into a marriage, and they will influence many for good and fly to heights that would otherwise be unimaginable. And so then Proverbs not only speaks to a married couple, it also speaks to us as parents. And in the same way that a couple can influence one another, so parents are actually the most influential people on earth when it comes to their kids. And so as we think about that, we think about influence. And sadly today, there's a sense in which, in some ways, influence has become almost a dirty word, because we have this army of influencers, an industry in itself that proliferate on social media with their glossy lives that they try to promote to us in order to monetize either their lives or whatever it be, in order to sell us stuff that we probably don't need, or to change our opinions, or to change the way we vote, or whatever it be. And yet at the same time, as we kind of dismiss that to a degree, we realise that Proverbs is actually written by a bunch of ancient influencers, when you think about it in those terms. But there's assumptions in Proverbs. Proverbs assumes that we have received the law of Moses, the law of God. Proverbs assume we know the God not only who is the lawgiver, but the God of grace. And so there is this underlying assumption as the Proverbs are delivered that we know this stuff. God's law is in our hearts and our minds. And so it seeks to distill the wisdom of the ages to lead us to know what it is to genuinely live well. Not just, glib advice from digitally enhanced influencers, but people who have walked the walk and either got it right and delivered that to us, or got it wrong and said, don't do this. Because when you think about it, Solomon got some things really right and some things really wrong. I probably wouldn't look to take all my marriage advice from Solomon, but he probably learned a lot of what not to do. And maybe that's the secret to being a good parent, that we learn from both what we have got right and what we've got wrong. The challenge of Proverbs, if I could maybe misquote a common phrase at the moment, is, will we learn from the wisdom of our elders, both past and present? And so we come to Proverbs again, and we see the research today tells us the most influential people on earth for children, for our children, are their parents. And it doesn't matter, even though we have this, encroaching digital world, parents are still and always are the most influential people on their children. Proverbs 20 verse 7, it says there, the godly walk with integrity, blessed are their children who follow them. The Good News translation says it slightly differently, and with all of these, it's actually fascinating to switch around in different translations to see how they say it. The Good News translation New Living Translation on that one says, children, it is good news, sorry about that. Children are fortunate if they have a father who is honest and does what is right. Proverbs 14:26. If you want to go over to there, I'll give you this one in two translations as well. Proverbs 14:26. Those who fear the Lord are secure. He will be a refuge for their children. You see this sense of influence. Proverbs 22, actually let me give you the ESV on that one, the English Standard Version. In the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. Proverbs doesn't say we'll be perfect, but it says the most influential thing we can do is to hang on to God no matter what. If we have strong confidence in God, our children will have a refuge. Proverbs 22 verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. You see, when you think about it, if the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, or the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, then this leads to virtue. That's the picture that Proverbs paints for us. Honesty, generosity, integrity, healthy relationships, the ability to delay gratification, all of those things. And what Proverbs says is, live that and it will lead you to a rich life, not millions of dollars, but a rich life, success, peace, satisfaction, all those things. And then it says, but alternatively, if you don't do that, then you might end up ultimately, if you go all the way down that path, in a meaningless and mean life of ruin and shame. And I guess the counsel of Proverbs is, if you start going down that path, change direction. Don't keep going down that path. And so then you get all these passages about discipline. And I want to not spend a whole lot of time on this one, but I do want to mention it, because when we think about discipline, we typically go to discipline being a negative. Discipline and harsh just seem to go hand in hand. Lack of love, the spare the rod and spoil the child sort of thing. But if I use it in a different context, if I talk about, Travis is a really disciplined athlete, suddenly it gives a different picture. Or if I say, Chloe's a really disciplined student, again, it's a different picture. It's a positive picture. So discipline is not automatically negative. And look, the spare the rod, spoil the child is actually a misquote. Proverbs 13:24. Those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children. Those who love their children care enough to discipline them. And so what we see over and over again through Proverbs is this connection between discipline and love. And love does not discipline in a fit of anger and beat the daylights out of someone. That is not love. And yet discipline says, I care enough about my child to put boundaries in place around them and then maintain those boundaries. Proverbs 29:15, a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. And then you come down to verse 17, discipline your children and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. And there are many more such proverbs. And I guess it reminds us, we have those New Testament passages about fathers, don't provoke your children, don't exasperate your children. And we're not saying ignore discipline, we're saying discipline and love go hand in hand. Love comes with boundaries, consequences. Love wants what is best for the child. Proverbs presents this tried and tested wisdom. It can steer us clear of some of those fads that exist. And it says, protect your child from the wrong. Lead them in the path of the right. Be flexible enough to adjust with life's changing seasons. There comes a time where kids become teenagers and sometimes it feels like they're pushing their parents away. They're not saying go away. It's just that renegotiation of the parent-child relationship. And all the research says teenagers need their parents even more, just in a different way. And even as an adult child, we still seek wisdom and counsel from our parents. Proverbs says, and this is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11 and 12, "My child, don't reject the Lord's discipline. Don't be upset when he corrects you, for the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights." We discipline because God disciplines in love. And as we think about that very proverb that's quoted verbatim in Hebrews, where in Hebrews it says, God's discipline is always right, not like us as fathers who try to get it right. And it says it will produce a peaceful harvest of right living for those that are trained in this way. And so as I hand over to Rahel in a moment, I want to leave you with one passage that Rahel will take up and go from there. Proverbs invites us to be people, parents of influence. And in Proverbs 6, verse 20, it says, "My son, obey your father's commands and don't neglect your mother's instructions. Keep the words always in your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you walk, their counsel will lead you. When you sleep, they will protect you. When you wake up, they will advise you. For their command is a lamp and their instruction is a light. Their corrective discipline is the way of life."
Growing up, I would always hate this part of the sermon. The part where we talk to the kids. The pastor would come up and he would say, "Children, you need to listen to your parents, you need to honor them, and you need to behave at home." And my mum's eyes would suddenly fix on me. Growing up, I always thought, her favorite Bible verse was the one where it said, "Honor thy father and thy mother." Because that's the way she would say it to me. She wouldn't say, "Hey, the Bible says honor your," she would say thy, speak in King James Version. And the hard thing about that as well is that often when the pastor would come up to preach that sermon, the pastor was my dad. So it would hit very close to home. Sometimes I wondered whether those two worked together to target me. But as I was working through the wisdom literature, I realized that Proverbs' instruction to children is more than that. And it's not just instruction to the young ones, the little ones, it's instruction to the parents, the big kids, those who never stop receiving wisdom from their parents. You see, Proverbs primarily is a family book. And Darren touched on this for a little bit, but when you read the book of Proverbs, it's structured for a lot of its chapters, it's structured as a father's instruction to his son. Now, again, that doesn't mean that our girls are counted out of this. In fact, the more you read on from it, you realize that all its messages, all its advice is useful regardless of gender. But the book of Proverbs primarily is a book about family. And the thing that Proverbs does so well, in my opinion, is that it doesn't force anything upon the family system. In fact, it speaks into it in a way where the instruction it gives is given as an invitation. And so Proverbs chapter 1 verses 8 to 9, after the introduction of the book, says this: "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck." This is how the book of Proverbs begins. It's a conversation between a father and his son. In fact, the image that the first 9 chapters of Proverbs gives is that it's a father and a mother speaking to their child, preparing their son for the kingship. And so as the father speaks to his son, I want you to take note of the way he does it in chapter 1. The address of the father here, "my son," suggests intimacy in this passage. The father is inviting his son, is inviting his child to take part in this lesson. And that's what I want us to see here. Children, in this text, the agency is with you. The father is not demanding the child's attention. The father is not commanding anything here. He is inviting his child into a relationship. The child is being invited to engage, but the choice to engage is with the child. And so the message here in Proverbs, as it moves through these sayings of wisdom, the message here is simple. To those of us children who choose to listen, to those of us children who respond to this relationship, we will be honored the same way jewelry adorns a person. These lessons are valuable. And as children, we take an active role in this relationship. You see, oftentimes Proverbs and the messages to children can be sort of weaponized in some way. Children need to do this and children need to do that, and you need to honor your father and mother because that's what is commanded. But Proverbs has a different picture to this, because in Proverbs, we see that by engaging in this relationship as children, honor is brought to us as well. We are honored in the parent-child dynamic just as much as our parents are honored. We are lifted up. We are adorned with beauty and with grace just by engaging with our parents. By engaging with our family, we are lifted up. And so this verse is echoed later on in Proverbs chapter 6, 20 to 22, which Darren read. My son, keep your father's command and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them always on your heart and fasten them around your neck. You know, a lot of times as children, we feel like we are passive products of our parents' relationship. We were born, they look after us, they raise us, and then we go out and we figure it on our own. And sometimes when we speak about children, it can feel a little bit like that children are just passive products of their parents' relationship. But there was this psychologist by the name of Murray Bowen. And Murray Bowen was instrumental in forming what we call family systems theory. And family systems theory has been instrumental in the way we talk about the family in modern times. But the thing that Murray Bowen put forward is that children are active agents in shaping the way our families operate. The relationship from child to parent and parent to child isn't one directional from the parent to the child. It's multifaceted. It goes both ways. And the interesting thing I find about this is that the book of Proverbs, through the way it speaks about that relationship, it agrees exactly with that. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 1 says this, the Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. Here, just in this verse, children are shown to have more agency than they are often given for. You see, Proverbs often does this thing, and Faye touched on it in her talk, and Darren did as well just before, where it compares and it contrasts two different types of people. And here, it's the wise versus the foolish. It does this thing, and it can make Proverbs often seem black and white. But what Proverbs does with this is it encourages us to make a choice. Will you go down the path of the wise, or will you go down the path of the fool? And it's the same thing we see in Proverbs 10:1. What this proverb shows is that children have an effect on their parents. We as kids directly impact our parents with the choices that we make. Two paths are given here, each with their own consequences. The consequence of joy and the consequence of grief. And it is the child's choice which direction they will take that will lead to the results. This also is echoed in chapter 15. A wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish man despises his mother. What we're seeing here is children, big kids, little kids. We have an effect on our families. We as children have influence in our family dynamic. And when you look at the way Proverbs is structured, the call in Proverbs to us as kids is, what will you choose? Will you go down the path of the wise and be open to learn, open to listen, and enjoy that moment in our lives where we get to eat of the goodness of wisdom? Or will you be a fool and will you think you know better than everyone and go down the path of righteousness yourself? We children have influence in our families. There's this idea called reciprocal influence, and it says it's the idea where your behavior reflects and affects a family's emotional health. I've seen this many times. I have the privilege of counseling up at Edinburgh. And oftentimes what you see with a child is a microcosm of what's happening at home. And a lot of the time, we as families can hear this and we can feel attacked by this. Oh, my son is suffering and it's my fault. My daughter is going through a hard time and it's my fault. But the adverse also needs to be considered, that with a positive relationship, with positive interactions, when a kid shows strength, when a child shows maturity, that is because there is strength in our family system. The good must be taken with the bad. The reality is we don't get it right, but we must take the strengths for the weaknesses as well. A child showing joy and a child showing maturity and a child showing agency speaks to the strength of the family system. And sometimes, unfortunately, when things go wrong, it speaks to the weakness in the family system. We aren't perfect. We don't get it right. But there is still strength within our families. And so as big kids, little kids, we learn that children carry relational weight and responsibility in our homes. The reality is, we don't have kids and keep living the same lives that we did. We don't have kids and once they get to the teenage where they're a little bit more independent, we don't just default back to the way we were before them. Children have influence in our dynamics. We have power. We have strength in our family system. And so as kids, no matter what age we are invited to engage in this relationship. We are invited to lean in, to listen, to learn, and to draw in to the pleas of our parents. Not only to bring honor to our parents, not only to honor our mothers and our fathers, but to bring honor to ourselves. Family is special. Family is powerful. And Proverbs knows that. You see, the fact that a book that is thousands of years old can come up with the same ideas and same concepts that modern psychology is coming up with is amazing. It speaks to the fact that God's wisdom is timeless. And God's wisdom for our families is timeless. But there's another element to this. An eternal significance to our family. And I want to finish up by reading Proverbs 17, verse 6. It says this: children's children are a crown to the aged, and the glory of children is their father. I love this verse. And I love this verse because here it echoes the language of salvation. Crown and glory. These words show the effects of a home. It is an effect that is far-reaching, an effect that it is something that has an effect on our salvation, on eternity. You see, Proverbs says that wisdom begins with God, but our experience of God often starts with our families. For God, family is one of the most important institutions in the Bible. Family is one of the most important strengths to faith and the way we preach faith in Scripture. And that's why we speak to our families today. It's hard. We get it wrong. It's not easy. I, as a son, get it wrong. My parents got it wrong. Today, we laugh about it. Why? Because there is salvation within our families. There is grace within our family systems. And God knows it. God believes in it. When God started His plan of salvation, He gave a promise to a family. A promise of a child that would once grow to a big family. And we walk through that promise through Genesis. The story of family. For God, family is worth investing His saving promise into. For God, family is worth coming onto this earth and dying for. For God, family is worth imparting timeless wisdom onto so that we can have an eternal impact on our generation. You see, wisdom for the family isn't just some rules and regulations. It isn't only a list of commandments. It is our experience of salvation. So when you get it wrong, kids, parents, spouses, when we make mistakes, believe that there is grace sufficient for you. But in the joys of family, in the strength, in the laughter, know that God is at work to save you, to save me, and ultimately to bring us into the family that we will be in heaven. This is our promise. Amen.